I've been a video game developer for more than 40 years now. I've worked on hundreds of titles and collaborated with thousands of people across this industry. Over time, I learned something from each of them, lessons that shaped and refined my craft. However, there is one developer I worked with early in my career who still haunts me. Even after all these years, I still can't forget what happened during the development of one particular project. Drowned God. I'd been brought on as a junior programmer at Epic Multimedia Group through a referral from my college professor. We were developing a game called Drowned God, which would later be published by Inkscape. For those unfamiliar with Drowned God, it was a puzzle-driven first-person point-and-click CD-ROM adventure game released for PC in 1996. The game was titled Drowned God, a name that alluded to a submerged ancient power which had been lost to time after it had been buried beneath memory and history. This idea shaped the game's entire premise, and the theme heavily inspired how we structured the gameplay. At its core, the game revolved around uncovering suppressed knowledge about conspiracy theories, occult secrets, esoteric symbolism, and humanity's origins. The game was built like a research labyrinth as the story unfolded through exploration and puzzle solving. Players investigated hidden documents, fragmented texts, and symbolic imagery tied to alternative archaeology, occult traditions, sacred geometry, alchemy, and Atlantis mythology. It was niche, strange, and unlike anything else being made at the time. I was also excited to work on the game's ambitious story, which starts out as a simple search for truth before spiraling into a layered conspiracy involving hidden bloodlines, Knights Templar, secret societies, and ancient advanced civilizations. I was one of the few junior developers on the team during the game's development. My job was to assist with engine adjustments, asset integration, puzzle scripting logic, navigation nodes, and trigger events. I was still a wide-eyed newbie at the time, and I remember trying to do my best on the tasks I was assigned while learning as much as I could. As the game's development continued, I grew closer to the team. There were about 86 people working on the game at the time. And while I enjoyed working with every single one of them, there was one person on the team who always felt out of place. His name was Neville Reed, and I will never forget the day I first met him. Neville was a research consultant specializing in conspiracy theories, esoteric symbolism, and occult studies. He'd been brought in to provide research support for the game's esoteric themes, expand upon the conspiracy framework, and ensure thematic consistency. Neville was also a narrative consultant with a programming background, so he was fully integrated into the team as a consultant and developer. I'd never met anyone like him before, and I could already tell there was something different about the new developer. Over the course of the game's development, Neville fleshed out the script's conspiracy theories as well as the game's esoteric and occult themes. He also used his extensive knowledge to provide authentic symbolic references, and he ensured internal consistency in the game's myth structures. I'd initially admired his work ethic and dedication to the game's thematic cohesion, but I eventually became horrified by the morbid lengths he went to deepen the symbolic and occult elements in the game. Neville would often make these strange statements about how every developer working on the game had been given a great task by the Old One. He also told me on several occasions that the Old One spoke to him every day, telling him to spread his message through this video game. I was confused at first, as I had no idea who this Old One was or what he was talking about. But Neville was convinced that the Old One was guiding our hands as we wrote the game's code. It was at this point that I realized that Neville wasn't just a consultant who studied the occult and was familiar with niche conspiracy theories. He was actually a full-blown occultist and conspiracy fanatic who believed we were all making this game by the will of an ancient being. Things only got worse from there as Neville began to put up these disturbing occult items on his desk and around the office. I can still remember how alarmed I was when I saw what it looked like an infant's skull sitting next to his PC on his desk. Neville had claimed that the skull belonged to the Old One's infant son, and he brought it there after the Old One had told him to. He also had these rotting human teeth he had scattered around his desk, which he said belonged to the Old One's mother. He even tried offering them to me, urging me to put them on my desk while I wrote gameplay scripts. I began to avoid Neville, as even though I'd never believed in the occult, I found these items and his behavior extremely disturbing. Things only got worse from there, as in addition to these grotesque items he would bring, I watched Neville cut open his palm with a knife and pour his blood around his keyboard. It really seemed like I was the only one on the team who noticed Neville's strange behaviors, and while I was extremely uncomfortable with it, I couldn't really complain as a junior developer. I told myself that I would just ignore his unusual antics and distance myself from him. But unfortunately, that didn't work, as Neville had now taken a weird interest in me. He would follow me around the office, asking me if I was free after work and if I would like to join his organization and their mission. I always politely declined as I told him I was only interested in making games and my career as a developer, but he was incessant. It didn't matter how many times I declined his invitation, Neville wasn't taking no for an answer. Things got so bad that I caught him following me home, so I decided to confront him. I told him that if he didn't leave me alone, I would go to the police and tell them that he had been harassing and stalking me. I also told him that the only reason I hadn't said anything at work was that I was a junior developer and I didn't want to cause any trouble during my first job, but I assured him that I would tell everyone if his harassment didn't stop. My threats to go to the police and tell the other developers what he'd been doing had worked, and Neville left me alone for some time. However, while I thought the bizarre situation with Neville was finally over, the worst was yet to come. During the weeks leading up to the game's release, I would spend late nights at work going over a few final details for the game's release. However, on one of these late nights, I heard strange noises from outside at around 1 a.m. Everyone had gone home and I was the only one left, so I was startled by the noises and went to check them out. I could feel my heart racing in my chest as 7 hooded figures were now outside. They were surrounding an unreleased copy of Drowned God, muttering words in a language I didn't understand. After a couple of minutes, one of the hooded individuals took off his hood and my heart dropped to my stomach as I recognized Neville. He gestured to his right as he uttered the words, "It's time." And 2 of the hooded individuals went to a nearby truck and brought out a struggling ram. They brought the animal to the circle and Neville revealed a knife. I could hear the ram's muffled screams as they put a muzzle on its mouth to silence its cries. With no hesitation, Neville slit the ram's throat over the CD, and they praised the old one as the animal bled out, dying on the floor. Then they dipped their fingers into the animal's neck and rubbed the blood on their faces as they thanked the old one. I felt like I was frozen in place, as even though I wanted to run, my feet stayed motionless. Once the ram stopped moving, Neville raised his hand and said, "Save your praises, brothers. There is still one more sacrifice for tonight." He then took a long pause before revealing what the second sacrifice was saying. "The old one has asked for young blood, so just like the ram that served as an appetizer for God, we must also slit the throat of a young man whom I've asked to join our ranks. He refused and even went as far as to threaten me. This man has spat on the gift I offered, and he must understand what that means. I've been monitoring his movements in secret, and I know he's been working late for the past week. So we bring him here, slit his throat over the ram for the ritual to be complete. Do not hesitate, brothers, for tonight the old one will drink the blood he craves, and he will know the taste of a developer's passion." I can't find the words to describe the fear I was gripped by in that instant, and I felt like my adrenaline kicked in as I ran for my life. Neville had noticed me bolting, and I heard him scream, "Stop!" But I didn't. I ran as far as my legs could carry me. I didn't stop until I reached my house and locked my doors. My heart was still racing in my chest, and I couldn't sleep that night. Even though I was terrified, I told myself that this was the final straw, and I planned on going to the police after I told the other developers what Neville had planned on doing. However, when I got to work the next day, Neville was gone. There were also no traces of the gruesome rituals he'd carried out the night before, and I didn't even see a single drop of blood from where the ram had bled out. It was at this point that I felt like I was losing my mind, as I wondered if what I saw actually happened or if I'd hallucinated the whole thing. I knew I couldn't go to the authorities without any evidence, and with Neville gone, it was my word against his. I felt so defeated that I asked to leave the team before the game's launch, and it took me a while before I began developing again. I've kept what happened that night to myself for most of my life, and I felt it was fitting to anonymously share what happened online now that I'm nearing retirement. It was an experience that marred my first job as a developer, And even though I'd worked so hard on the game, I never played Drowned God because, even though it sounded silly, I was convinced the game had been cursed. Over the years, I've made several attempts to get some closure, and I once tried to look into Neville and find out where he was. However, it seemed like Neville Reed had vanished off the face of the earth. He wasn't even listed in the game's credits. I attempted to trace his family so I could ask about his current whereabouts, but my search led to several dead ends. I tried to put the whole thing in the past after I couldn't find Neville, and I told myself that time would eventually give me some form of closure. However, I keep having these terrifying thoughts that the man named Neville Reed wasn't actually a person, and I somehow worked with a developer who never even existed. In 1996, point-and-click PC game Drowned God, developed by the now-defunct Epic Multimedia Group and published by Inscape, remains one of the strangest releases of the mid-90s CD-ROM era. Drowned God was considered to be a niche and obscure title after its release, but it began to gain attention after the game was linked to several unsettling incidents. One of these incidents was shared by an anonymous developer who claimed to have worked on the game and witnessed occultic rituals during the game's development. There was also a widespread notion that the video game was cursed after a small number of anonymous players reported feeling nauseous, passing out, or going into shock after loading up the game. Despite the many disturbing reports that were associated with Drowned God, none of these incidents have ever been confirmed. It's been extremely difficult to confirm any of these reports, as they still remain anonymous, leading many to believe that these incidents are all bogus or fictional. There were also no prevalent reports of players going into shock or passing out after the game's release in 1996. The game's creator, Richard Horne, who is often referred to by his pen name Harry Horse, brought Drowned God to life with the game's co-creator, Alistair Graham, and there were no confirmed reports of any programmers performing occultic rituals during the game's development. Furthermore, there were also no records of a consultant with a programming background among the remaining 83 individuals who worked on the game in the mid-90s. However, there is still a majority of people who believed Drowned God is a cursed video game. While most of these theories have remained speculative, there are several gamers who are convinced that the horrific 2007 tragedy, where the game's creator, Richard Horne, brutally murdered his wife before committing suicide, is connected to the supposed occultic rituals that were revealed in the anonymous developer's story. Several investigations into these claims revealed that there is no proof that someone carried out these occultic rituals in 1996. However, despite the lack of conclusive evidence, some people remain convinced that Drowned God is one of the many cursed video games in circulation, causing terror to any unfortunate individual who decides to play the game. My name is Ethan, and I'm not someone who scares easily. I'm not superstitious, nor do I believe in ghost stories. But what I am about to tell you made me question everything. This happened a few months ago, one ordinary night. I was living alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of Chicago. After a long week of work, my plan was simple: relax, play video games, and drink a beer or two. I heard a lot about Silent Hill PT, a demo that was said to redefine horror. I downloaded it years ago before it was retired, but had never played it. That night, I decided to try it out. I turned off the lights in the apartment, plugged in my headphones, and turned on my console. From the first few minutes, the game grabbed me. The atmosphere was suffocating. A narrow corridor that seemed to have no end, a radio that spat out disturbing messages, and an environment that managed to get under your skin. Everything seemed carefully designed to keep you in constant tension. I was so focused that I didn't notice the time. I stayed up late playing, getting more and more absorbed in that strange and oppressive world. I wanted to play it without guides or YouTube videos, which made it ridiculously difficult. I didn't care and kept playing all night. It all started subtly, almost imperceptibly. As I was walking down the hallway looking for numbers for a puzzle, I felt something strange in my room. A silent vibration, as if the floor was shaking. I took off my headphones, but I didn't hear anything out of the ordinary. I thought it was my imagination and continued playing. Soon after, however, something strange happened in the game. As I turned the corner of the corridor, I noticed that there was a reflection in the glass of a picture hanging on the wall. It wasn't my character or something that belonged to the game. It was my room. I paused, confused. How did they do this? Does the game take screenshots with my webcam? I admit that the effect they had tried to have on me had worked. I was really uncomfortable playing, but that made me want to play more. After all, it was just a video game, and being scared was the fun of it. A few minutes later, something happened that I couldn't ignore. The door to the corridor in the game slammed shut without my touching it. And at the same time, I heard a thud coming from my living room. I let go of the controller and immediately turned around. My front door was locked as usual, but the sound had been real. I decided to check my apartment even though I knew it was ridiculous. It wasn't a big place, barely a bedroom, a living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. I checked every nook and cranny, even under the bed. There was nothing and no one. I tried to laugh at myself. You're just being suggestible. I went back to the game, but something wasn't right. Now the corridor on the screen looked different. The paint on the walls were peeling, more than I remembered. And the lights were flickering. Also, the sound of my footsteps inside the game didn't match what I was seeing. They were faster, as if someone else was running behind me. That was more than enough. I turned off the game. I got up and went to the kitchen for another beer, trying to shake that feeling off. As I opened the refrigerator, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. In the reflection of the window glass, a figure was behind me. I turned around with a jerk, but there was nothing there. I returned to the couch without turning on the game. I felt that someone was watching me. I turned on the TV, looking to distract myself, but the buzzing in my head wouldn't go away. Then my console turned itself on, and the game resumed loading from where I had left off. The game continued without my intervention. The camera slowly panned to a lamp on the ceiling, which was swinging as if someone had just walked by. I tried to turn off the console, but the button would not respond. The same with the TV remote control. Everything was out of my control. On the screen, the door to the corridor burst open. At the end of the corridor, there was something new. A blurry shadow, hard to make out. It looked humanoid, but its movements were erratic, as if it were about to fall apart. Suddenly, the light in my living room began to flicker, synchronizing with those of the game. I could no longer ignore it. Something was interfering with my reality. I closed my eyes, trying to calm down. I was breathing heavily. I think I was having a panic attack. When I opened my eyes, the figure in the game was closer. I jumped off the couch when I heard footsteps, this time in my apartment. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and turned into the hallway that led to my bedroom. I couldn't walk fast. I really felt like I was going to pass out. The footsteps stopped, but there were wet marks on the floor, as if someone had walked barefoot after getting out of the shower. My breathing was erratic, but I couldn't stand still. I advanced down the hallway, each step heavier than the last. The door to my room was ajar, though I remember closing it earlier. I pushed the door open with the knife held high. The room was empty, but the window was open. The curtain was moving slightly, though there was no wind outside. Then I heard it, a low, distorted laugh, as if coming from a damaged tape recorder. It came from the closet. I didn't wait. I flung open the closet doors and threw a stab in the air. But there was nothing there. I know what you're thinking. My attitude didn't make much sense. Anyone else would have run away, and I am one of those people too, but there was something in that room. It was as if I was hypnotized. As if I was moving automatically and nothing I did made sense. Before I could react, the TV in the living room turned on. On the screen, the game showed something I hadn't seen before. My apartment captured in chilling detail. The figure from the game was now inside my virtual living room, moving toward the camera. The laughter returned, but this time it was clearer and came from behind me. I turned quickly, and there it was. The game figure standing in my real room, looking at me with a blurry, decomposed face. I didn't know how I reacted so quickly. I threw the knife at it, but the figure simply disappeared, as if it had never been there. The television exploded in a burst of sparks, and the console shut itself off. All was silent. The only sound was my ragged breathing. I stood still for a minute, then 5, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing happened. The dizziness grew worse to the point where I couldn't stand up. I wanted to unplug the console, but I couldn't even fully control the direction my hand was going. I reached over to pull the wires out of the console. I felt something behind me as if the presence had returned. Someone was definitely behind me. Before I could finish reacting, my eyes closed and I fell to the ground. And that was the end of my night. When I woke up, the TV was fine and the console was unplugged. What the hell had happened? Was it all a dream? No. The knife was next to me. I plugged in the console and checked it. The game was no longer installed. And in my download history, I couldn't see it either. It was as if I had never opened it. After that night, I stopped playing video games for a while. Even now, I find it hard to be absolutely silent. I need background noise to keep my mind off what happened. I tried to tell the story to a friend, but he didn't believe me. You must have fallen asleep in front of the console, he said, laughing. I let him believe it. I knew it hadn't been a dream. A month later, I moved to another apartment and tried to forget what happened. Many nights, I still go on Reddit trying to find out about PT. That's when I found out that a lot of people claim to have had similar experiences to mine. Apparently, there's a cursed copy going around, and even though it's not that easy to find, I was able to do it. And many other people will too.
My name is David. I'm 19 years old, and until recently, I was an ordinary guy. Well, as ordinary as someone obsessed with the dark and forbidden can be. I was always attracted to the mysterious, to what others said was dangerous or shouldn't be touched. So when I heard about Polybius, I didn't think twice. Legend had it that it was a cursed game, an arcade machine that appeared out of nowhere in the 80s and disappeared just as quickly. Supposedly, those who played it experienced hallucinations, headaches, and, in some cases, even went insane. Of course, that made it perfect for me. I found a recreated version on the dark web, and upon downloading it, it felt like I had found a treasure. The night I played it was quiet at first. It was a simple game of bright colors and hypnotic patterns, but there was something different about it. After a while, I noticed that I couldn't look away. The geometric figures seemed to move beyond the screen. I lost track of time. When I finished, I had a headache, but I felt euphoric. I definitely didn't feel haunted or like the urban legends wanted me to feel for playing a simple arcade game. I went to bed thinking that perhaps it was all an exaggeration. I couldn't have been more wrong. The next morning, I woke up with an excruciating headache, but I ignored it. The university waited for no one, and I was already running late. As I walked to the subway station, something caught my eye. The colors. Everything seemed brighter, as if the world was saturated. A graffiti on a wall seemed to move as I glanced at it out of the corner of my eye. I shook my head, blaming tiredness. The ride was worse. The train was crowded as usual, but people's faces looked wrong. Some had eyes that were too big, others crooked mouths that elongated when I blinked. I clung to the handrail, feeling the ground move. As I climbed down, I almost tripped. Sweat soaked my shirt. As I reached the campus, I tried to concentrate. I was sure I just needed food or coffee, but when I sat down in class, things got worse. The projector was projecting patterns similar to those in the game. I closed my eyes for a moment, but I could swear I heard a buzzing sound as if someone was talking right behind me. I looked, but no one was there. During the break, I went to the bathroom to wash my face. At that point, I wasn't even thinking about the cursed game. I thought I might have a fever or be hallucinating. When I looked in the mirror, something was wrong. My reflection wasn't following me instantly, as if there was a slight delay. I tried to move fast, and for a second, I swore my other self smiled before me. I left the bathroom almost running. In the hallway, things were still twisting. Students walked around me, but their movements were mechanical. A boy walked past me, and his face was completely black as if someone had erased his features. I closed my eyes and snapped them open. Everything was normal again. I decided I needed some air. I went out into the backyard, where there were rarely any people. But there it was, that feeling of something watching me. I turned and saw a figure across campus. Tall, thin, and completely dark. I couldn't make out features, but I felt it looking at me. When I blinked, it was gone. I tried to concentrate on my classes, but it was impossible. Every time I looked at the professor, his face seemed to deform as if it were melted. I looked at my classmates and saw that some of them had no eyes. The screaming started when I closed my eyes. No, it wasn't real. I had to remind myself of that. I decided to skip the rest of the day. I couldn't stay there. On the way back, every corner seemed to hide something. As I turned onto an empty street, I saw that figure again. Closer this time. I walked faster, trying not to look back. I felt its presence, though it made no noise. The last straw was on the subway. I sat in an empty carriage, trying to calm down. Then the lights started flickering, and when they went out completely, I saw him. He was standing in front of me. He was taller than I imagined, with claws where his hand should be, and a smile that wasn't human. I closed my eyes and prayed for the lights to come back on. When they did, the carriage was full of people, and the figure had disappeared. When I got out of the subway, I no longer knew what was real. The streets were full, but all the people seemed distorted. The voices were murmurs, a constant noise that drilled my ears. I tried to call someone, but my phone only displayed geometric patterns that moved like the game. I walked, not knowing where I was going. The world seemed to twist around me. I saw the figure once again, now closer than ever. I ran, pushing people, shouting for someone to help me. No one reacted. It was as if I was trapped in a bubble. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I threw myself at a random man, begging him to help me. But before I could say anything coherent, I felt strong hands holding me. Cops. They threw me to the ground, telling me to calm down. I shouted at them that someone was chasing me, but they didn't listen. They just exchanged glances and said something about drugs. At the police station, they locked me in a small cell. They searched for me, but found nothing in my system. No drugs, no alcohol. One of the officers mentioned that I might be crazy. Sitting in the corner of the cell, I tried to explain to one of them what had happened, but I saw in his eyes that he didn't believe me. Hours passed, and the demon appeared again, just outside my cell. My only reaction was to laugh. I don't know why I laughed, but I laughed a lot. I couldn't stop laughing, even though my body wanted to cry. When the policemen came to pick me up, their faces were those of the figure. The next thing I remember was being in a white room, with people talking around me. I didn't understand anything anymore. Now I'm here, in this white, silent place. I think it's an asylum. We are in an asylum, aren't we? Have I gone crazy? It's because of the game, and in the end, it was all true. I wouldn't say you went crazy. Maybe that game activated something in your head that needs to be repaired. With a lot of work, you will come out, David, but I need you to concentrate. Of course, you think it's a lie. Everyone thinks it's a lie until they start to see it.